The mountain man's voice cut through the jeering crowd like an axe through dry wood. "I want the 60-year-old woman," Stephen Moore declared, his weathered hand raised high above the sea of mocking faces. The auction house erupted in cruel laughter, voices rising in disbelief and scorn. "What's wrong with you, Moore?" someone shouted from the back. "Take the young one like any sensible man would." But Stephen's steel-gray eyes never wavered from the trembling figure on the platform, where Carol Davis stood with her head bowed, her graying hair catching the harsh afternoon light streaming through the dusty windows. The auctioneer, a portly man named Gary Jimenez, wiped sweat from his brow as he struggled to maintain order. "Now, now, folks," he called out, his voice strained with nervous energy. "The gentleman has made his choice clear. Do I hear any other bids for this particular lot?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by scattered chuckles and whispered comments about the strange mountain man who had ridden into town that morning with a pack mule and enough gold dust to buy whatever he pleased. Carol's shoulders shook as she fought back tears of humiliation. At 60 years old, she had never imagined her life would come to this. Standing on an auction block like livestock, her worth measured in dollars and cents by men who saw her only as a burden or a curiosity. The younger women beside her, Michelle White and Sarah Gonzalez, had already been claimed by eager bidders, their youth and strength making them valuable commodities in this harsh frontier town. But Carol remained unwanted and forgotten until this strange man with his wild beard and penetrating gaze had spoken those unexpected words. The townspeople continued their mockery, their voices growing bolder as they sensed no opposition to their cruelty. "She's old enough to be your mother, Moore," called out Frank Myers, the town's blacksmith, his face red with laughter. "What use could you possibly have for such an old bird?" Others joined in, their comments growing more vicious and personal. "She'll be dead within the year," someone shouted. "Waste of good money," another added. The words struck Carol like physical blows, each one driving deeper into her already wounded spirit. But Stephen Moore remained unmoved by their taunts. He had lived alone in the mountains for 15 years, surviving winters that would kill lesser men, facing down bears and wolves with nothing but his wits and his rifle. The opinions of these soft town dwellers meant less to him than the chittering of squirrels in the pines. His gaze remained fixed on Carol, and something in his steady regard seemed to give her strength. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she lifted her head and met his eyes. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words. Stephen saw not an old woman past her prime, but a survivor, someone who had endured hardships that would break most people. The lines on her face told stories of struggle and perseverance, of children raised and lost, of dreams deferred but never quite abandoned. Her hands, though weathered and marked by years of hard work, still held a steadiness that spoke of competence and determination. This was not a woman who would break under pressure, but one who would adapt and endure. The auctioneer, eager to conclude this embarrassing spectacle, called out once more, "Going once for $50 to Stephen Moore." The crowd's laughter reached a crescendo, with several men slapping their knees and wiping tears from their eyes. "Going twice," Gary continued, his gavel raised. "Sold to the mountain man for $50. The bang of the gavel echoed through the hall like a gunshot, sealing Carol's fate and binding her to this stranger who had chosen her when no one else would. As the crowd began to disperse, still chuckling and shaking their heads at the strange transaction they had witnessed, Stephen approached the platform where Carol stood frozen in uncertainty. The other buyers were already leading their purchases away, eager to put their new acquisitions to work or to begin whatever arrangements they had in mind. But Stephen moved slowly, deliberately, his boots making soft sounds against the wooden floor as he climbed the steps to where Carol waited. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emanate from deep within his chest. Up close, Carol could see the kindness in his eyes, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing physical presence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with hands that looked capable of crushing stones or gentle enough to handle a newborn foal. His beard was streaked with silver, and deep lines around his eyes spoke of years spent squinting into mountain sun and snow. "I know this ain't what you expected," Stephen continued, his words careful and measured. And I know you got no reason to trust me, but I give you my word as a man of honor that you'll be treated with respect and dignity in my home." He paused, studying her face for any sign of her thoughts. "I ain't looking for a wife, if that's what you're wondering. I need help running my place, and I reckon you need a place to run to. Seems like we could help each other." Carol found her voice at last, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why?" she asked, the single word carrying the weight of all her confusion and disbelief. "Why choose me when you could have had any of the younger women?" It was a question that had been burning in her mind since the moment he had made his shocking declaration, and she needed to understand his reasoning before she could take another step forward. Stephen was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the windows where dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight. When he spoke again, his words carried a weight of memory and hard-earned wisdom. "I've lived alone in the mountains for 15 years, he said. 15 years of silence broken only by the wind and the wildlife. A man gets to thinking in all that quiet, gets to understanding what really matters and what's just fool's gold dressed up to look pretty." He turned back to her, and Carol saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. It wasn't pity or condescension, but recognition, as if he saw something in her that she had almost forgotten existed in herself. "Those young women," he continued, "they got their whole lives ahead of them. They got dreams and hopes that don't include being buried alive in a mountain cabin with an old hermit. But you, ma'am, you got the look of someone who's already lived through the worst life can throw at you and came out the other side still standing." The truth of his words hit Carol like a physical force. She had indeed lived through the worst, had buried a husband and 3 children to disease and accident, had lost her home to drought and debt, had found herself alone and destitute in a world that had no place for women like her. The auction block had seemed like the final humiliation, the last stop on a journey that had stripped away everything she had once held dear. "I need someone who won't break when the winter winds start howling," Stephen said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "Someone who knows how to make do with less, how to find strength when there don't seem to be any left to find. I need a partner, not a burden, and I reckon you might need the same thing." He extended his hand to her, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. "What do you say, Carol Davis? Will you come with me and see what we can make of this strange arrangement?" The use of her name startled her. In all the proceedings, she had been referred to only as Lot Number 7, or the older woman. To hear her actual name spoken with respect and consideration was almost overwhelming. She looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and scarred from years of hard work, but steady and sure. Around them, the auction house was emptying, the other participants eager to get on with their business and their lives. Carol thought of the alternatives that awaited her if she refused his offer. She could return to the streets, to the charity of churches that saw her as a burden, to the slow starvation that awaited women with no family and no means of support. Or she could take this leap of faith with a man who had seen something in her worth claiming when no one else would. Slowly, she placed her weathered hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip as he helped her down from the platform. "I'll come with you," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I want you to know that I'm not some broken-down old mare ready for the glue factory. I've got work left in me, and I won't be treated like charity." A smile tugged at the corners of Stephen's mouth, the first hint of humor she had seen from him. "Wouldn't dream of it," he replied. "I got a feeling you're tougher than most of these town folk could ever imagine." He gestured toward the door, where his pack mule waited patiently in the street. "My cabin's about a day's ride into the mountains. It ain't much to look at, but it's solid and warm, and there's always food on the table." As they walked through the streets of the town, Carol became aware of the stares and whispers that followed in their wake. The story of the strange mountain man who had bought the old woman was already spreading, growing more outlandish with each telling. She heard fragments of conversation, speculation about Stephen's motives and predictions about her fate. Some of the comments were cruel, others merely curious, but all of them treated her as if she were already gone, already dead to the world she was leaving behind. But with each step away from the auction house, Carol felt something shifting inside her chest. It was a sensation she had almost forgotten, a lightness that came from having somewhere to go and someone who wanted her there. For the first time in months, she wasn't walking toward charity or begging for scraps of kindness from people who saw her as a burden. She was walking toward a new life, uncertain though it might be. Stephen's cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, their branches heavy with snow, even though spring was supposedly on its way to the lower elevations. The structure was larger than Carol had expected, built from massive logs that spoke of both permanence and craftsmanship. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, and she could see that the windows had been fitted with real glass, a luxury that many frontier homes did without. I built it to last, Stephen said, noticing her appraisal of the structure. Figured if I was going to live up here, I might as well be comfortable about it. He led her inside, and Carol was surprised by the warmth and cleanliness of the interior. The main room was dominated by a large stone fireplace, and shelves lined the walls, filled with books and various tools and implements. A kitchen area occupied one corner, with a wood-burning stove and a table that could seat 4 people comfortably. "There's a room upstairs that's yours," Stephen said, setting down her small bundle of possessions. "It's got a good bed and a window that looks out over the valley. You can see for miles on a clear day." He paused, suddenly seeming uncertain. "I hope it suits you. I know it ain't what you're used to." Carol walked to the window and looked out at the vast expanse of mountains and sky. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of peaks and valleys that stretched to the horizon. She had lived her entire life in towns and cities, surrounded by the noise and bustle of other people. The silence here was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines and the distant call of a hawk circling high overhead. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. "I never imagined country like this existed." She turned back to face him and saw relief in his expression. "You said you needed help running this place. What exactly did you have in mind?" Stephen's face brightened as he began to describe the routine of his mountain life. There were animals to tend, a large garden to maintain, food to preserve for the long winters, and countless repairs and improvements that needed attention. He had been managing alone for years, but the work was becoming more difficult as he aged, and there were tasks that would benefit from a woman's knowledge and skill. "I've got 3 milk cows and a small herd of goats," he explained, "chickens for eggs, and I usually hunt enough meat to last the winter. But I ain't much good with a needle, and my cooking's gotten mighty repetitive over the years. I can keep body and soul together, but I reckon you might could make this place feel more like a home and less like a survival camp." As the days passed, Carol began to understand the rhythm of life in the mountains. She rose before dawn to help with the milking, her hands quickly remembering skills she had learned as a girl on her father's farm. The work was hard but satisfying, and she found herself growing stronger rather than weaker as her body adapted to the physical demands of mountain life. Stephen proved to be a man of his word in every respect. He treated her with unfailing courtesy and respect, never making demands or assumptions about her role in his household. When she took over the cooking duties, he praised her efforts with genuine appreciation, even when her first attempts at cooking over a wood stove resulted in burned biscuits and oversalted stew. The isolation that Carol had initially feared became a source of peace rather than loneliness. The constant noise and judgment of town life faded from her memory, replaced by the gentle sounds of wind and water and wildlife. She discovered that she had opinions and preferences that had been buried under years of trying to please others and conform to their expectations. In the mountains, with only Stephen for company, she began to rediscover who she was beneath the layers of disappointment and defeat. Their conversations, initially stilted and formal, gradually became more natural and wide-ranging. Stephen was surprisingly well-educated, with a collection of books that rivaled many town libraries. He had been a teacher before coming to the mountains, he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. But the death of his wife and children in a cholera outbreak had driven him to seek solitude and healing in the wilderness. "I thought I was done with people," he admitted, his eyes focused on the dancing flames. "Thought I'd live up here until the mountains claimed me, and that would be the end of it. But a man gets lonely even when he thinks he wants to be alone, and there's something to be said for having someone to talk to who understands what it means to lose everything you thought mattered." Carol nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "I used to think that losing my family was the worst thing that could happen to me," she said quietly. "But losing myself afterward, that was worse. I spent so many years just trying to survive that I forgot there might be more to life than just getting through each day. As spring advanced into summer, Carol's transformation became more pronounced. The constant outdoor work had tanned her skin and strengthened her muscles. She moved with more confidence and purpose, no longer the broken woman who had stood on the auction block. Her hair, which she had begun to wear loose rather than pinned severely back, caught the sunlight and revealed strands of silver that looked more like precious metal than signs of aging. Stephen noticed the changes, though he was careful not to comment directly. Instead, he found himself watching her as she worked in the garden or tended the animals, admiring the grace and competence with which she handled every task. She had proven herself to be everything he had hoped for, and more, a true partner in the demanding work of mountain life. The first real test of their partnership came in late summer, when a severe storm rolled through the mountains with little warning. The wind howled like a living thing, bending the great pines until Carol was sure they would snap. Rain lashed against the windows, and lightning split the sky with terrifying frequency. When a tree fell across the path to the animal shelter, trapping the livestock in a structure that was beginning to leak. Both Carol and Stephen knew they had to act quickly. Working together in the driving rain, they managed to clear enough of the fallen tree to create a passage for the animals. Carol showed no fear as she helped guide the frightened cows and goats to safety, her voice calm and reassuring even as the storm raged around them. By the time they had secured all the animals in the main barn, both were soaked to the skin and exhausted, but they had saved their livestock from what could have been a disaster. "I couldn't have managed that alone," Stephen told her as they stood dripping in the barn, surrounded by the warm smell of hay and the contented sounds of the animals. "You were fearless out there." Carol felt a surge of pride at his words, a recognition of her own strength and capability that she had almost forgotten she possessed. The incident marked a turning point in their relationship. The formal politeness that had characterized their early interactions gave way to a deeper understanding and mutual respect. They began to work as a true team, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other's efforts without the need for extensive discussion or explanation. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant shades of red and gold, Carol realized that she was happier than she had been in years. The work was hard, the isolation complete, and the approaching winter promised challenges that would test them both. But for the first time since losing her family, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she had a purpose and a place in the world. The transformation was not lost on Stephen either. The woman who shared his mountain home bore little resemblance to the broken figure he had claimed at the auction. Carol had found her strength again, had rediscovered the fierce independence and determination that had helped her survive the worst that life could offer. She was no longer a woman in need of rescue, but a partner and an equal, someone whose presence enriched his life in ways he had never expected. When the first snow began to fall, blanketing the mountains in pristine white, Carol stood at the kitchen window and watched the flakes drift past the glass. The sight should have filled her with dread, knowing that they were now cut off from the outside world until spring. Instead, she felt only a deep sense of contentment and security. She had helped prepare for this moment, had worked alongside Stephen to ensure that they had enough food, fuel, and supplies to last through the long months ahead. The winter proved to be as harsh as Stephen had warned, with temperatures that dropped far below anything Carol had experienced in town. But the cabin remained warm and comfortable, and their careful preparations served them well. They settled into a routine that revolved around the essential tasks of survival, tending the animals, maintaining the fire, and preserving their strength for the challenges that each day might bring. It was during those long winter evenings with the wind howling outside and the fire crackling in the hearth that Carol and Stephen truly got to know each other. They shared stories of their past lives, their dreams and disappointments, their fears and hopes for the future. Stephen proved to be an excellent storyteller, with a dry sense of humor that could make Carol laugh until tears ran down her cheeks. In return, she shared her own experiences, finding that the painful memories of loss and hardship had somehow become easier to bear when shared with someone who understood. "You know," Stephen said one evening as they sat reading by the fire, "when I rode into town that day, I wasn't even planning to bid on anyone. I just went to see what all the fuss was about. He looked up from his book, his eyes reflecting the firelight. But when I saw you standing there, saw how they were treating you, something just came over me. I couldn't stand to see a person reduced to that, couldn't stand to see them treat you like you were nothing. Carol set down her own book and studied his face in the flickering light. And now, she asked quietly, do you regret your impulse? Stephen's answer came without hesitation. Not for a single moment, he said firmly. You've made this place come alive again. You've made me remember what it feels like to have someone to care about, someone to share the good times and the bad times with. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I know we didn't come together in the usual way, and I know there's folks who would say we're both too old to be starting over, but I can't imagine my life without you in it now. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Carol felt her heart racing as she considered the implications of what he was saying. Over the months they had lived together, she had come to care for Stephen deeply, had found in him a kindness and strength that complemented her own. But she had been careful not to presume anything about his feelings, not to hope for more than the respectful partnership they had established. Stephen, she said slowly, are you saying what I think you're saying? Her voice was barely above a whisper, afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter the moment and send them back to the careful politeness that had once defined their relationship. He set aside his book and moved to sit beside her on the simple wooden bench they had positioned near the fire. I'm saying that I love you, Carol Davis, he said, his voice steady and sure. I love your strength and your courage and your kindness. I love the way you brought life back to this old cabin and to this old man. And if you'll have me, I'd be honored to call you my wife. The proposal was so different from her first marriage, which had been arranged by her father when she was barely 18. Then she had been young and naive, with romantic notions about love and marriage that had been slowly worn away by the harsh realities of frontier life. Now at 60, she understood that love was not just passion and romance, but partnership and respect, shared burdens and mutual support. Yes, she said simply, reaching out to take his weathered hand in hers. Yes, I'll marry you, Stephen Moore. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible at this stage of life. They sat together in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down to glowing embers as the wind continued to howl outside their warm sanctuary. The wedding took place in the spring, when the snow had melted enough to make travel possible again. They rode down to the town together, Carol wearing a simple but elegant dress that she had sewn herself during the long winter evenings. The townspeople who saw them could hardly believe the transformation in the woman who had stood on the auction block less than a year before. Gone was the broken, defeated figure they remembered. In her place stood a confident, radiant woman who carried herself with dignity and grace. The ceremony was performed by the traveling minister who made his rounds through the mountain communities twice a year. A small crowd gathered to witness the unusual union, some drawn by curiosity, others by genuine goodwill. Frank Myers, the blacksmith who had mocked Stephen's choice at the auction, approached them after the service with his hat in his hands. I owe you both an apology, he said, his face red with embarrassment. What I said that day at the auction, it was cruel and uncalled for. I can see now that you found something special together, and I'm ashamed of my behavior. Stephen accepted the apology graciously, while Carol simply nodded, her forgiveness implicit in her calm acceptance of his words. As they prepared to return to their mountain home, several other townspeople approached to offer their congratulations and best wishes. The transformation in Carol had not gone unnoticed, and many commented on how happy and healthy she looked. The contrast with the desperate woman they had seen at the auction was so stark that some could hardly believe she was the same person. You saved her, one of the women whispered to Stephen as Carol was saying goodbye to the minister's wife. You saved her from a terrible fate. Stephen shook his head gently. No, ma'am, he replied. She saved herself. I just gave her the space and time to remember who she really was. His words carried the weight of truth, for he had indeed witnessed Carol's remarkable transformation from victim to survivor to partner and equal. The ride back to their cabin was peaceful and companionable, with Carol seated comfortably on the gentle mare that Stephen had bought for her use. The mountains were coming alive with spring, wildflowers blooming in the meadows and streams running full with snowmelt. It was a landscape that promised renewal and new beginnings, perfectly suited to the couple who had found love and partnership in the most unlikely of circumstances. As they crested the ridge that revealed their valley spread out below them, Carol felt a deep sense of homecoming. The cabin looked small and welcoming in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney where they had banked the fire before leaving. The animals were visible in the pasture, the garden plot ready for planting, everything waiting for their return. "Home," she said softly, and Stephen smiled at the contentment in her voice. "Home," he agreed, and urged his horse forward toward the life they had built together. The years that followed were marked by a contentment and productivity that surprised them both. Carol's skills as a homemaker and Stephen's knowledge of the mountains combined to create a life of relative comfort and security. They expanded the garden, improved the animal shelters, and even added a room to the cabin that served as Carol's sewing and craft space. Visitors were rare, but when travelers did find their way to the remote cabin, they invariably commented on the obvious happiness and partnership of the couple who lived there. Carol and Stephen worked together with an efficiency born of deep understanding and mutual respect, each anticipating the other's needs and contributing their own strengths to their shared endeavors. The harsh mountain winters no longer seemed like ordeals to be endured, but rather as opportunities for quiet companionship and reflection. Carol had become an accomplished seamstress and quilter, creating beautiful and practical items that made their home more comfortable and attractive. Stephen had returned to his love of reading and learning, often sharing interesting passages or ideas with Carol as they sat together in the evenings. Their love story became something of a legend in the surrounding area, told and retold by travelers who had witnessed their remarkable partnership. The tale of the mountain man who had chosen the older woman at the auction and the transformation that had followed served as inspiration to others who had given up hope of finding happiness or purpose in their later years. But for Carol and Stephen themselves, their story was simply their life, lived one day at a time with gratitude and determination. They had found in each other not just love, but redemption from the losses and disappointments that had marked their earlier years. In choosing each other, they had chosen life over mere survival, hope over despair, partnership over loneliness. As Carol worked in her garden one summer morning, 5 years after that fateful auction day, she paused to watch Stephen repairing a section of fence in the distance. His movements were still strong and sure, though his hair had grown whiter and the lines in his face had deepened. She knew that her own appearance had changed as well, that the years of mountain life had left their mark on her body and face. But she also knew that she had never been more beautiful or more valued than she was in this place, with this man who had seen her worth when the rest of the world had written her off as useless. The cruel laughter of the auction crowd seemed like something from another lifetime, a distant memory that no longer had the power to wound her. Stephen looked up from his work and caught her watching him. He raised his hand in a wave, and she waved back, a simple gesture that carried all the love and contentment of their shared life. In that moment, she understood that the real auction had not been the one where she was sold to the highest bidder, but the one where two damaged souls had chosen to invest in each other, to believe in the possibility of redemption and renewal. The mountain man had declared his choice before a mocking crowd, but time had proven the wisdom of his decision. In choosing the 60-year-old woman, Stephen Moore had chosen a partner who would enrich his life immeasurably. And in accepting his offer, Carol Davis had chosen to reclaim her dignity and her future, to prove that it is never too late to begin again. Their story continued to unfold with each passing season, a testament to the power of human resilience and the transformative nature of love that sees beyond surface appearances to the true worth of a person. In the mountains where they had made their home, surrounded by the eternal beauty of peaks and valleys, they had created something precious and enduring, a love that had grown stronger with each challenge they had faced together. The auction house where their journey had begun eventually fell into disrepair and was torn down, but the love story that had started there lived on, inspiring others to look beyond conventional expectations and to recognize the value that exists in every human heart. Carol and Stephen had proven that it is never too late to find love, Never too late to start over. Never too late to discover that the best chapters of life may yet be unwritten. As the sun set over the mountains on another peaceful day, Carol and Stephen sat together on the porch they had built overlooking their valley. The work of the day was done, the animals were settled for the night, and the world was quiet except for the gentle sounds of evening in the wilderness. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink above the peaks that had become their sanctuary. In the distance, an eagle soared on the evening thermals, its wings spread wide as it rode the invisible currents of air with effortless grace. Carol watched the magnificent bird and thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, this place, this life that she could never have imagined when she stood broken and defeated on that auction platform so many years ago. The transformation had been gradual but profound, like the slow change of seasons in the mountains. Each day had brought small victories and quiet revelations, moments of growth and healing that had accumulated over time into something remarkable. She had rediscovered not just her strength and competence, but her capacity for joy and wonder, her ability to find beauty in simple things and meaning in everyday tasks. Stephen had been both catalyst and companion in this transformation, offering her not just shelter and security, but respect and partnership. He had seen in her what she had forgotten existed, had believed in her potential when she had lost faith in herself. But more than that, he had given her the space and freedom to rediscover who she truly was, beneath the layers of loss and disappointment that had accumulated over the years. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day? Carol asked quietly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. If you had just let someone else bid on me, or if no one had bid at all? Stephen considered the question seriously, as he did most things. I try not to dwell on what might have been, he said finally, but I know that my life would have been a lot emptier and a lot lonelier without you in it. I think maybe we were meant to find each other, even in such an unlikely way. Carol nodded, understanding the truth of his words. Their meeting had been unconventional, even shocking to the people who had witnessed it, but the love and partnership that had grown from that strange beginning had proven to be more real and lasting than many relationships that had started in more traditional ways. They had built something together that was both practical and profound, a life that satisfied their need for companionship and purpose, while honoring their individual strengths and experiences. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, first one or two, then dozens, then hundreds, until the entire dome of the heavens was ablaze with points of light. The mountain air was so clear and unpolluted that the Milky Way was visible as a broad band of light stretching across the sky, a sight that never failed to fill Carol with awe and wonder. I used to think the stars were cold and distant, she said, her voice soft with contemplation. But up here, they seem almost close enough to touch, like they're watching over us, approving of what we've built together. Stephen squeezed her hand gently. Maybe they are, he said. Maybe the whole universe conspired to bring us together, to give us both a second chance at happiness. The romantic notion was unlike his usual practical nature, but Carol appreciated the sentiment behind it. As they prepared to go inside for the night, Carol took one last look around the valley that had become their world. The cabin stood solid and welcoming behind them, the gardens and outbuildings testament to their hard work and careful planning. The animals were safe in their shelters, the larder was well stocked for the coming winter, and everything was in its proper place. But more than the physical security and comfort they had created, Carol treasured the emotional sanctuary they had built together. In Stephen's steady presence and unwavering support, she had found the courage to heal from old wounds and to embrace new possibilities. In her strength and competence, he had rediscovered the joy of partnership and shared purpose. Their love story had begun with mockery and disbelief, with a crowd of people who could not understand why anyone would choose an older woman when younger options were available. But time had vindicated Stephen's choice and Carol's courage in accepting his offer. They had proven that love and partnership are not limited by age or conventional expectations, that two people who truly see and value each other can create something beautiful and lasting, regardless of what others might think. As winter approached once again, Carol and Stephen prepared for the season with the confidence and efficiency of experienced mountain dwellers. Their fourth winter together promised to be like the others, a time of quiet companionship and shared tasks, of long evenings by the fire, and the deep satisfaction that comes from being well prepared for whatever challenges nature might bring. But this winter would be different in one important way. Carol was expecting their first visitor since their wedding, a young woman named Diane Lewis, who had written to them after hearing their story from a traveling merchant. Diane was recently widowed, with two small children and nowhere to go. She had heard about the couple who had found happiness in the mountains and had written to ask if they might have work for someone willing to help with household tasks in exchange for shelter and food. Stephen and Carol had discussed the request at length before agreeing to take in the young family. Their cabin could accommodate the additional people, and there was certainly enough work to justify the extra help. But more than practical considerations, they were moved by the opportunity to offer someone else the kind of second chance they had been given. "Maybe this is our way of paying it forward," Carol had said when they made their decision. "Maybe we can help her find her strength the way you helped me find mine." The arrival of Diane and her children brought new energy and purpose to the mountain home. The young woman was grateful and hardworking, eager to contribute to the household in any way she could. Her children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, brought laughter and liveliness to the cabin that had been quiet for so long. Carol found herself taking on a mentoring role with Diane, sharing the skills and knowledge she had accumulated over her years of mountain living. She taught the younger woman how to preserve food for the winter, how to manage the wood stove for optimal heat and cooking, how to care for the animals in the harsh mountain climate. In teaching these skills, Carol realized how much she had learned and grown since her own arrival at the cabin. Stephen proved to be surprisingly good with the children, his gruff exterior hiding a gentle patience that delighted the youngsters. He taught them about the mountains and the wildlife, showed them how to track animals in the snow, and identify different types of trees and plants. Under his guidance, they learned to respect the wilderness while appreciating its beauty and bounty. The presence of the small family changed the dynamics of the household, but in ways that enriched rather than disrupted their established routines. Meals became more lively affairs, with the children's chatter and questions adding warmth to the kitchen. Evenings by the fire now included storytelling and games, as Stephen and Carol shared their knowledge and experiences with eager young minds. For Carol, having another woman in the house brought a different kind of companionship than she shared with Stephen. She and Diane talked about things that men often didn't understand or appreciate, sharing the particular challenges and joys that came with being women in a demanding world. Carol found herself remembering her own children, lost so many years ago, and discovering that the pain of those memories had softened into something more like bittersweet nostalgia. As spring arrived and the snows began to melt, Diane made an announcement that surprised no one who had been watching her transformation over the winter months. She had decided to stay in the mountains permanently, to make her life there with her children rather than returning to the uncertainties of town life. She had grown strong and confident under Carol and Stephen's guidance, had learned skills that would serve her well in the wilderness, and had found in their remote valley a peace and security she had never known before. "You've given us more than shelter," she told Carol and Stephen as they sat together planning the spring planting. "You've given us a home and a future. I want to build a cabin of my own nearby, if you'll have us as neighbors. I want my children to grow up in a place where they're valued and protected, where they can learn what really matters in life." The decision to expand their small community felt natural and right to all involved. Stephen helped Diane select a site for her cabin and began teaching her the skills she would need to build and maintain her own home. Carol continued to mentor her in the arts of mountain homemaking, while also enjoying the companionship of another woman who understood the challenges and rewards of their chosen life. The construction of Diane's cabin became a community project that brought all of them together in a common purpose. Even the children contributed according to their abilities, carrying tools and supplies, helping to clear the building site, and learning valuable lessons about cooperation and hard work. By the end of summer, a sturdy log cabin stood ready for occupancy, complete with a stone fireplace and glass windows that Stephen had ordered from town. As Diane and her children settled into their new home, Carol reflected on the remarkable changes that had taken place since that day at the auction. What had begun as a desperate transaction between strangers had grown into something much larger and more meaningful. They had created not just a household, but a community based on mutual support and shared values. They had proven that family could be chosen as well as born, that love and loyalty could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. The story of their mountain community began to attract attention from others seeking alternatives to the harsh realities of town and city life. Over the next few years, they welcomed several more families, each carefully chosen for their willingness to work hard and contribute to the common good. The valley that had once echoed only with the sounds of wind and wildlife now rang with the voices of children playing and adults working together toward shared goals. Carol found herself in the unexpected role of community matriarch, the woman others turned to for advice and guidance. Her transformation from auction house victim to respected leader was complete, though she herself was often amazed by the journey she had traveled. The broken woman who had stood on that platform so many years ago seemed like a different person entirely, someone she could barely remember being. Stephen, too, had grown and changed in ways he could never have anticipated. The solitary mountain man who had once sought only isolation and peace had become the cornerstone of a thriving community. His knowledge and skills were in constant demand, and his steady leadership helped guide their growing settlement through the challenges that inevitably arose when people chose to live together in harmony. But through all the changes and growth, the bond between Carol and Stephen remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love had not diminished with the passage of time or the addition of others to their lives. If anything, it had deepened and strengthened, seasoned by shared challenges and enriched by mutual respect and understanding. As they sat together on their porch one evening, watching the sun set over their valley now dotted with several cabins and filled with the sounds of a living community, Carol thought about the cruel laughter that had greeted Stephen's declaration at the auction. Those people who had mocked his choice could never have imagined what would grow from that moment of apparent folly. "Do you think they would believe it if they could see us now?" she asked, gesturing toward the thriving settlement they had helped create. "All those people who laughed when you chose the 60-year-old woman?" Stephen smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features with warmth and satisfaction. "I don't much care what they would think," he said honestly, "but I hope they would see that there's more than one way to measure a person's worth, more than one kind of beauty and strength in this world." His words carried the wisdom of experience and the confidence of a man who had made the right choice and seen it vindicated by time. The mountain man who had declared his preference for the older woman had proven that true value lies not in youth or conventional attractiveness, but in character and resilience, in the capacity for growth and the willingness to love and be loved. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky above their peaceful valley, Carol and Stephen sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the community they had helped create and sustained, by the love they had discovered in the most unlikely of circumstances. Their story had become legend, but for them it was simply life, lived fully and gratefully, one day at a time. The auction house where their journey began was long gone, torn down and forgotten by most who had witnessed that fateful day. But the love story that had started there continued to unfold, inspiring others to look beyond surface appearances and to recognize the potential for transformation and renewal that exists in every human heart. In choosing each other against all expectations and conventional wisdom, Carol and Stephen had chosen hope over despair, love over loneliness, and life over mere survival. Their legacy lived on in the thriving community they had built and in the countless lives they had touched with their example of courage, compassion, and unwavering faith in the power of human connection.